is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Germany brought to a standstill as a general strike over pay grounds planes, trains and public transport. We're in Berlin.
Our other headlines: bank shares take a breather after the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank is rescued by rival lender First Citizens.
Moscow says it's shot down a Ukrainian drone over Russian territory. We'll have reaction to that and the new recruitment drive to bolster Russia's military.
In the face of mass protests, Benjamin Netanyahu delays controversial plans to change Israel's legal system.
And walking the walk at Shanghai Fashion Week. The designers hoping the show will jumpstart orders after the pandemic.
Germany has ground to a halt as transport workers stage the country's largest strike in decades.
Airports and railway stations are empty, with the 24-hour walkout bringing huge disruption to Europe's largest economy. Unions representing nearly 3 million workers want a pay rise of up to 12% and are calling the strike a matter of survival for their members amid soaring inflation. Our correspondent Trent Murray is live in Berlin. Trent, this looks like the strikes have brought the country to a standstill. How widespread is this?
Paul, this has effectively paralysed much of Germany on this busy Monday start to the week. You find yourself a mode of transport and it more or less has been shut down because of these strikes. We know that all intercity train services have been cancelled. We know metro and subway services in many cities have also been cancelled. If you want to take a ferry up in the northern part of the country, those have been cancelled, and probably most disruptive for the rest of Europe, all flights from the major airports, Frankfurt and Munich in particular, the ones most affected. And of course, it is worth noting those are two airports that are very much used for connections, for international arrivals. And so what we have seen today really is millions of people having their day disrupted. We have seen a number of them are clearly heeding the earlier warnings from unions and are either working from home or have been driving to work. We have seen traffic increase in a number of cities. One, I suppose, positive, if you will, for drivers was just at the last moment before this strike was to commence, an agreement was made between unions and those that operate the Autobahn system. They too were going to shut down parts of the tunnel network on various motorways, but that was averted at the last minute for safety reasons. And so people have been able to drive. But if you are waiting for public transport, you still have several hours ahead of you. This strike will wrap up at midnight local time, so just over 6 hours away. But those transport companies, including Lufthansa and Deutsche Bahn, are warning their passengers that the knock-on effect of all of this could still last for several days, and for people that are travelling either in Germany or through Germany to allow some extra time and plan ahead for the journey.
Is there room for a deal on this, Trent, or will we likely see more strikes?
Well, we understand that those negotiations have been taking place today. You have got on one side of the negotiating table two separate unions who effectively have joined forces in order to create as much disruption as possible. On the other side of the table, pay negotiators from the public service as well as Deutsche Bahn itself. But they do have quite a gap in between them that they need to close. The unions would like to see a pay increase of between 10 and 12%. They say that is needed to deal with skyrocketing inflation, the cost of living going up here. But those employer groups and the public service bosses are saying that a pay increase of that volume, if you will, is just not affordable for them, and that if they were to increase pay by that much, then it would have to be pushed on to passengers and ticket prices. So still some way to go, but I think it is worth noting that the unions are calling what is happening today a warning strike. As you might guess, the clue is in the name. They say more of this can be expected unless those pay negotiations are settled between the two sides.
OK, Trent Murray in Berlin. Many thanks.
The American bank, First Citizens, has agreed to buy the failed lender Silicon Valley Bank. First Citizens will acquire SVB from the United States financial regulator, which currently controls its assets. The family-run bank will take on all of SVB's deposits and loans. It'll also operate SVB's 17 branches. Let's talk to Matt Malley, the Chief Market Strategist at Miller Tabak and Company. Matt, good to see you. First of all, in simple terms, what's next for Silicon Valley Bank now that it's been bought out by First Citizens?
Well, I mean, the whole system right now, it seems to have calmed down quite a bit today, and that's the whole banking system, I should say, and that's something that we needed. I mean, the one big concern is that, you know, the situation with Silicon Valley Bank, with a bunch of startup companies who had so much money concentrated on one bank, would a run on that bank spill over to other areas where it really didn't need to, and so this is giving a lot more confidence back to the system. And we've heard all sorts of concerns about, you know, will this, you know, become a contagion, especially with the things that went on with Credit Suisse. This is a kind of development that shows that there's that some other banks have confidence in what the portfolio they have left over with, and it just has calmed things down quite a bit. And we don't see this big change now of people pulling the big, you know, lots of money out of the smaller banks and into the big banks, and that's very important to calm things down.
As you say, the ripple effect from this financial turmoil has spilled globally. I mean, some analysts, as you point out, warning of a 2008-style banking crisis. I mean, do you think it's really safe now to come out from behind the sofa, or should we go back behind the sofa because of what's coming next?
Yeah, I just don't see this right now, anyway, as being the 2008 style crisis. You know, maybe things do deteriorate more than I'm thinking right now. But the thing is, the bigger banks have had the regulation they've needed, and they seem to be in much better shape. The one concern, though, however, is that is this going to cause a kind of you know, change in lending, the tightening of lending standards that will cause the economy to slow down and still have them cause the markets to go down. So even though it's not 2008 all over again, it doesn't mean we aren't going to face some serious, or at least some somewhat serious headwinds as we move through the year.
Well, can you answer your question? I mean, what is, do you think, the long-term effect of Silicon Valley Bank's demise? I mean, what effect will it have on lending, and who will be hit?
Well, first of all, I mean, we've already seen it with these startups. I mean, a lot of these companies had already been seeing a lot less money coming from the private equity firms and venture capital firms that had been funding them for so long. That's why they needed to go to the bank and get some of their money out. You know, when you already have that pulling in their horns, then you have the banks lending out less money. That's the type of thing that could and probably will, I think, lead us to recession. Again, that doesn't mean we have a 2008-style crisis, but it does mean that people need to be a little bit careful about assuming that just because we seem to have averted a banking crisis, that we still don't have repercussions down the road that will cause markets and the economy to slow down a little bit.
Matt, whenever you have something like this, I mean, critics will call out for government action or regulators' intervention. I mean, in your view, what, if any, action is required to stabilise the financial situation?
Well, we're going to have to get more regulation on the regional banks, especially in the regional banking, small banking area. There was just, you know, just because they are, you know, they seem to be getting their act together now. People, again, for the confidence in the system, and for people to leave their money in these banks, we're just going to have to see more government regulation. And again, that's something that usually doesn't bode well for economic growth, at least in the banking area. So again, it's something that leaves me as some caution and leads me to believe that the economy is going to face some headwinds as we move through the rest of the year.
Matt, good to talk to you. Thanks for your time and expertise. Matt Malley, Chief Market Strategist at Miller Tabak and Company.
Moscow says its air defences have shot down a Ukrainian drone over a Russian town.
The Defence Ministry says 3 people were hurt and apartment blocks damaged in an explosion after it was brought down. Ukraine has not yet commented. Our correspondent Stuart Smith has the latest on the alleged drone attack.
Yeah, well, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, this was a Soviet-era drone retrofitted to carry explosives. And after traveling around 250 kilometers over Russian territory and getting as close as around 200 kilometers from Moscow, it was intercepted by Russian electronic warfare units, which disabled the drone's navigation system, eventually forcing it to the ground. That created an explosion, which created a 15-meter wide crater, according to the Russian state news agency TASS, and also sent debris flying as far as 500 meters away from that site. That resulted in 21 homes being damaged and also indeed 3 people injured. There's no indication from the Russian Defense Ministry as to where that drone was heading, as to what it was going to hit or where it was going to hit, but the region where it was eventually downed, Tula, is well known within Russia as being an area with considerable defense and manufacturing capabilities.
We are hearing that Moscow's on something of a recruitment drive for the military, looking to entice troops with promises of cash bonuses and other incentives. What more do we know?
Yeah, well, the need for this was announced by the Russian Defense Minister in December, who said that there would be hundreds of thousands of new recruits signed up to the military, not as employees of the military so much as contract soldiers, given a private contract to serve for the usual period of about 3 years. And he said, Sergei Shoigu, the Defense Minister, that hundreds of thousands would be required. And over the last month, we've been getting details about how exactly this will be implemented, seemingly at the regional level, with each region of Russia able to choose the methods by which they encourage people to join. Now, that could involve cold calling phones. It could be asking people to come to recruitment centres and then, as well as updating their military conscription details, be asked if they want to join the military for a considerable sum of money. One regional commissar said the maximum payment could be around $2,500 but the minimum would be around $500 per month to fight for the Russian military. Now, that is a deal which some have chosen to accept, but clearly not enough. It's a deal we've seen before that was being offered to Russian citizens before mobilization was announced last year, clearly by the fact that mobilization then had to go ahead, forced mobilization without those benefits. That wasn't completely successful, but the Russian Ministry of Defense trying again, and that seems to be a way to avoid a second wave of mobilization, something the Kremlin has promised multiple times will not happen. Bear in mind the Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to run for a 5th term next year, and indeed Russia still does seem to need more troops. But there is one caveat: although it's voluntary to sign up, it's not voluntary to leave. So even after the term of the contract expires, Russian citizens will know that as long as there's a presidential decree in place, meaning that they have to remain, which is likely to remain for the duration of the so-called special military operation, then they cannot leave fighting in Ukraine.
Stuart Smith in Moscow there. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're in the United States next. Is the banking industry calmer after the rescue of Silicon Valley Bank? Not exactly.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
there. Welcome back to Global Business Europe. As it's calm before the storm, banking worries rumble on across the United States following the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and New York's Signature Bank.
The lenders folded under the weight of heavy losses, raising concerns about the safety of deposits. And in a memo to Twitter staff, Elon Musk says the platform's value has nearly halved compared to last year. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, so
yes.
All a bit twitchy when we last talked on Friday. How are things? How are the markets so far?
Well, all a bit twitchy is the answer to that one, really. I'm a bit bereft, to be honest with you. There hasn't been a banking crisis this weekend, and we've had one for the last 2 weekends. I don't know what to do with myself, and nor does anybody else here. And the reason for that is we suspect there is more to come. It is not quite over yet. However, my report today to you is that there is a sort of calm at the moment. There wasn't anything that happened that was particularly noticeable over the weekend, so I guess that is good. However, when you pick up your phone in the morning, which I did a couple of hours ago, lots of scary headlines from lots of people who apparently are in the know about what may happen over the coming months. So we'll just have to wait and see. In no particular order, this is where we're at the moment. So Janet Yellen, who's the Treasury Secretary, has seemed to have clarified her remarks from last week, when on the one hand she said, yes, we'll rescue all depositors from all regional banks should there be an issue. And then she sort of wrote back from that on another occasion. I think the administration has clarified that they basically will support depositors should there be a run on any of the regional banks coming up. The other thing is that we know that the banks, including the big ones on Wall Street, are going to what they call the Fed's emergency window. Now, you have to be a Wall Street insider to know where that window is, and I am an insider, so I can tell you it's very high up, tucked around a corner, and you need a ladder to get there. But if you know where this window is, and you're a bank, then you can take squillions of dollars out every night just to keep your business going overnight, and apparently they are, including some big Wall Street names, which is why I say, you know, we're not out of the woods just yet. And then a man called Neil Kashkari, who is very well known on Wall Street, and absolutely nobody has any idea who he is overseas. But he is the head of the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis, in the hardscrabble Midwest of the country, in the city of Minnesota, or the state of Minnesota. He's in the city of Minneapolis. And he said over the weekend that he thought that the banking crisis would accelerate the chances of a recession here in America by the end of the year. Now, the good news is that we do have that bank that started all this, SVB, has been taken over by a bank from North Carolina called First Citizens Bank. And this is interesting because First Citizens was the number 30 bank in the list, and it's taken over the number 16 bank in the list. So it just goes to show you how careful you must be with your money when you are a banker. Right now, all the regional banks, the stocks are sharply up this morning, including First Republic, which is thought to be the next one that is vulnerable. Also, the big name banks are all up here. And on Friday night, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury released documentation saying that actually all the banks have passed the stress tests. Some of them are a bit more stressed than others, but all of them are resilient. So that's another reason why we're okay today. I think there is a worry about Deutsche Bank, but Deutsche Bank has been a basket case for a very long time now, as was Credit Suisse. So we'll see what happens there. And at the moment, the Dow is up 0.5%, the Nasdaq's down 1%, the S&P 500 is up by 2 points, and the 10-year yield is at 3.49%, up 0.1%, whatever that means. Guys.
Whatever that means. Talking whatever that means, what does Elon Musk taking a big hit in his wallet mean? What's going on there?
Well, it is a big hit as well. We love talking about Elon Musk on this program, don't we? And he wrote an email to Twitter staff, the handful of staff that he hasn't fired. That's a slight exaggeration. He has 2,000 staff, by the way, now. He had 7,500 last October when he took it over. Anyway, he wrote an email and he said, look, basically, the company's worth about $20 billion. And there was like a sharp intake of breath as the staff read this, because they thought he paid $44 billion for the company, and indeed he did. So it's worth much less than half what he actually paid for it. And we also know this is because he's been issuing what they call stock grants to members of staff. Now, this is a clever little wizard wheeze which bosses do, where they offer the staff a chance to buy the share price more or less at today's price, where it's not really worth very much, but then they can't sell it until it is worth much more down the road. And it's an incentive for them to work jolly hard to get there. Now, he also in this email said that the company was 4 months away from running out of money, and that's why there were so many layoffs. But he does say he sees a clear but difficult path to a valuation of $250 billion, which is 10 times where we are now. And this is why we love Elon Musk, because he's the ultimate optimist. 2 other quick lines for you. He does also say that someone stole the source code for Twitter. Now, I have no idea what the source code is, but I looked it up, and it turns out to be the thing that the whole operation is actually physically based upon, the software that actually runs it. And somebody has published that online. They think it was a disgruntled member of staff. And finally, going back to last week, when poor old Shou Chu from TikTok was verbally beaten up by members of the Energy and Commerce Committee on Capitol Hill, today we learned that Kevin McCarthy, who's the Speaker of the House, is forging ahead with legislation to ban TikTok. Guys.
John, good to see you. Thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Singapore's Prime Minister has begun a 6-day visit to China. Singapore was one of the first countries to back China's global infrastructure development project known as the Belt and Road Initiative. Lee Hsien Loong spoke to China Central Television ahead of his visit.
Well, we supported it because we saw this as a good strategic move by China. China is growing, China is prospering, China's place in the world is becoming more important. The Belt and Road Initiative, we saw it as one way China could contribute to the development of the region and therefore integrate itself into the regional network of cooperation and interdependence, and therefore be welcomed across the region in a win-win way. The region needs infrastructure, the infrastructure needs financing. China is capable of doing that, of building infrastructure. It can also help to provide the financing. It can also develop the trade and economic links with the countries in the region. And with the Belt and Road Initiative, there's a framework within it which this can be done. With China within our region, the biggest economy, it's important that we develop that relationship in an open and sustainable and, I think, mutually beneficial way.
China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister says Beijing will continue working with other countries for mutual advantage. Qin Gang made his remarks to China's Development Forum, an annual event that brings Chinese decision-makers together to discuss the country's latest policies. China's Foreign Minister says Beijing is committed to building a better future for all, echoing a concept first introduced by President Xi Jinping 10 years ago.
The concept of building a community with a shared future for mankind has provided China with a fuel to overcome the development dilemma. Today, the Chinese economy is deeply integrated with the global economy. China has become a major economic partner for over 140 countries and regions. China has contributed, on average, over 30% to global economic growth for 10 consecutive years.
Leslie Marstorp, Vice President of the New Development Bank, which funds projects in emerging markets, gave me his key takeaways from this year's event.
What was significant this year, naturally, is the fact that it's for the first time back in person, meaning that for the last 3 years of absence, this is really the first time that people were able to gather physically in a room. There were a few themes that sort of dominated the conversation, I would say. The first one, given the geopolitical context, was really about whether we face the risk of greater fragmentation in the world economy as a consequence of the geopolitical tensions, meaning that could we find more decoupling, signs of decoupling happening, which will have profound negative impacts on the world economy. That, I would say, is one of the big themes. The second major concern was naturally about financial and banking stability because of the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, Credit Suisse, the troubles of Credit Suisse, which led to them being acquired by UBS. Those aspects also dominated, especially from the central bank governors of PBOC, of Yigang, and so on. There was a big focus on that topic. And then thirdly, the climate crisis. Climate always is a major theme at these gatherings because it represents the long-term, more structural sort of underpinnings of this dialogue. So it was a very interesting conversation, to say the least.
Very interesting, and some very heavy subjects on the agenda there, lots to talk about. So you mentioned that the China Development Forum is being held in person for the first time since the pandemic. How much of a difference do you think that made?
It makes a huge difference. You know, as you know, you cannot really replace the in-person, the sort of corridor talk, the meetings that take place one-on-one, and you need that eyeball sort of warmth and emotional touch in order to make progress on some of these more difficult topics. For example, the tensions between the United States and China naturally features very prominently at these sessions. But, you know, you can only talk so much. There's much more is required in terms of, you know, one-on-one conversations with some of these very senior decision makers who can shape public opinion and indeed opinion makers in their respective countries and indeed in their companies, whether it's Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, or any of these big global bankers.
Egypt is becoming a full member of the New Development Bank, the latest of a new intake of members. There's been also the establishment of a permanent headquarters there in Shanghai, where you are. How would you rate the current performance and relevance of the NDB?
New Development Bank, as you know, will be turning 8 this year in July, so it's still a relatively young institution if you compare us to all the other multilateral banks like the World Bank, European Investment Bank, Asia Development Bank, who have existed for 50, 60, and in some cases 70 years. However, the bank has experienced significant growth. I mean, we've been really on quite a significant journey since 2015. Today, the bank has an approved loan book of $33.5 billion, representing more than 80 large infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure projects in very big emerging markets of, you know, Brazil, China, India, Russia, South Africa, and now also Bangladesh, Egypt, and other countries that have joined. What we will see going forward now is the bank continuing on this theme of membership expansion as we become a more global enterprise anchored in the emerging markets.
European Union members have agreed a deal with Germany on phasing out combustion engines by 2035. Germany, a key car manufacturer, had threatened to veto new rules that would ban petrol and diesel by that date, seeking exemption for cars that run on e-fuels. EU members have agreed that combustion engines using fuels that are neutral in CO2 emissions will now be permitted.
Chairman of the Saudi National Bank has resigned 2 weeks after his comments on Credit Suisse prompted shares in the Swiss lender to fall dramatically. Earlier this month, Amar Al-Qadari said SMB, Credit Suisse's biggest shareholder, was not planning to invest more money in the bank. The SMB said Al-Qadari had resigned for personal reasons.
Saudi Aramco has agreed to buy a 10% stake in a Chinese oil refiner for $3.6 billion. The deal will see Aramco supply 480,000 barrels a day to Rongsheng Petrochemical Company. It's the second major energy partnership between Saudi Arabia and China in as many days. The deals are the biggest between Saudi Arabia and China since President Xi Jinping visited the kingdom in December.
IKEA has completed the sale of its Russian factory to a local company. It sold its Novgorod plant to the firm Invest Plus more than a year after halting activities in Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine. IKEA still owns a stake in 14 shopping centres across the country.
Now, Honduras has become the latest country to establish formal diplomatic ties with China. The move by the Central American nation ends a decades-long relationship with Taiwan. Our correspondent Alistair Baverstock reports.
Honduras has announced the start of formal diplomatic ties with China after the Central American nation cut decades-long ties with Taiwan Island. In a statement from the country's foreign ministry, Honduras recognises the existence of just one China in the world, adding that the government in the capital Tegucigalpa had informed Taipei of the decision prior to the announcement. China has on multiple occasions called the Taiwan question the core of China's core interests, and Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. The move to cut ties is a reflection that the One China principle is now more commonly accepted by the international community. China and Honduras will now hold formal relations at the ambassadorial level, with embassies to be established in the coming months. Following this decision, only Guatemala and Paraguay remain among Taiwan's allies in Latin America, and pressure will now be building on them to follow suit. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
Beijing has welcomed Honduras' decision to recognise the One China policy. China's foreign ministry said no preconditions has been set when the two countries agreed to establish diplomatic ties.
China will actively promote mutually beneficial cooperation in various fields and support Honduras' economic and social development. China will do this in order to benefit Honduran people in the spirit of mutual respect, equality, mutual benefits, and joint development, and based on the One China policy. We want to tell Taiwan authorities that Taiwan independence is a dead end. Dollar diplomacy has no way through. Any plots that go against the tide of history are doomed to end in failure.
Marco Eliud Giron is a deputy in the National Congress of Honduras. He told CGTN that his country is looking forward to more people-to-people exchanges with China.
Honduras has opened its doors to the rest of the world and has become one of the 182 countries to establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. Honduras is known as the heart of Central America, and we send our sincere greetings to all Chinese people. There is also a large number of overseas Chinese in Honduras who have lived with us for many years. We hope that more Hondurans can now travel to China to study abroad, in universities or to learn technology. We also expect more investment from the Chinese government. We welcome them with open arms.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
And you are watching CGTN. Still ahead, Benjamin Netanyahu delays controversial plans to change the legal system after mass protests. We're live in Israel.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference. What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen acts.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories. Germany brought to a standstill as a general strike over pay, ground, planes, trains and public transport.
Bank shares take a breather after the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank is rescued by rival lender First Citizens.
And Moscow says it has shot down a Ukrainian drone over Russian territory with 3 people injured on the ground.
Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has delayed controversial changes to the legal system in the face of huge protests. Strikes have been taking place across the country, with all flights from Israel's main airport grounded.
Crowds gathered outside the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, in Jerusalem on Sunday. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sacked his defense minister, who opposed these legal reforms. Israel President also called for the legislation to be halted. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv. Stephanie, well, Netanyahu has obviously blinked and backed down, at least for now.
Yes, it could be called a back down, but the people that are protesting here all around me, behind me, who have been here all night long, all day long, and throughout the country, similar scenarios in Jerusalem in the north, they don't see it as a back down, and they're not really accepting it. Because that announcement, or that, what we're understanding coming from Benjamin Netanyahu's office, is that a deal was struck with his coalition partner, Itamar Ben-Gvir, extremist, right-wing minister in this current government who has a criminal record for violence against Arabs. The deal is they'll delay this overhaul of the judicial process, and in exchange, what Benjamin Netanyahu has promised to Itamar Ben-Gvir, this extremist right-wing minister, is that he can establish a national guard that Ben-Gvir will control. A national guard that would, the implications are, for the protesters around here, the protesters who are protesting against this overhaul, and it doesn't mean the overhaul will stop. Also a National Guard that will very much threaten Arab populations of inside Israel and across the Green Line in the occupied territories. Itamar Ben-Gvir is a settler, and the implications there of him having an armed National Guard, I'll just say that some of the social media groups that I'm following, that I'm on, they're comparing this to maybe a deal or the rise to power in Germany. In Nazi Germany, they're saying that it amounts to a group of brown shirts. That's what I'm seeing written on some social media groups. And the brown shirts, of course, were sort of armed stormtroopers that brought Hitler to power. So this is extreme, certainly not accepted, and the people are still here, and that's the reason why.
Stephanie, so much for what the politicians are saying. What of those protesters surrounding you? Will this pause, if we can call it that, be enough to make those protesters go home now?
They say no. Even before this announcement came through, this news came through, I was talking to people and I said, what if? You know, giving them sort of the what if scenarios. And what they were saying is there's, at this point, because they don't trust Benjamin Netanyahu, they don't trust his government, they don't trust any sort of pause or delay. They said a delay means a regrouping of forces, and they feel that the erosion of democratic values will continue and that it will just be a pause. They don't trust it. And that is over and over again what I'm hearing from the people here. Essentially, when the defense minister was sacked, people here viewed that as the start of getting rid of the unwanted, getting rid of those, the voices of dissent. And they see that here in a very, very grave and serious manner.
Stephanie, for those of us outside Israel, should we see this as just a political row over legal and constitutional changes, or is this part of a wider constitutional and political crisis?
Certainly what they're saying here and what they're saying abroad, you know, those analysts who are looking at the situation here, they're seeing it as a crisis. It's an unprecedented, historic crisis. Israel, the people who were here, who fought in the wars to establish the state of Israel, say they've never seen anything like this in terms of the threat to what they say are the values of Israel. Israel doesn't have a constitution, and a lot of many of the analysts here and the people here say that's part of the problem. There's no constitution. And then again, go back to the idea of the occupation. Many people here say people are fighting here. They're protesting about democracy. But as long as there's occupation, there is is no democracy, because you can't have democracy, quote unquote, for one people and one nation and not have it for the other. So this is a crisis moment in the country that many perceive as not just going to pass with the deal that Benjamin Netanyahu carved with one of his coalition partners over the past hours.
Stephanie, thanks for that. Our correspondent Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv.
In other news, Hungarian lawmakers have voted to approve Finland's accession to NATO. The ruling Fidesz party supported the application. The vote had been delayed several times since last July. All NATO members must individually ratify any application to join the military alliance. A vote on Sweden's application is expected to happen at a later date. Let's speak now to our correspondent, Pablo Gutierrez in Budapest. So, Pablo, a vote in favour for Finland. What were the key points from the debate?
Well, right now we are waiting to hear the result of the vote that is supposed to take place anytime soon here at the Hungarian parliament. This day has been in the making since last summer, and it's been postponed time and time again. The Hungarian government has shifted its justifications over the postponement, but political analysts we have spoken with believe that Budapest is trying to exert its leverage over the EU, which has blocked billions of dollars in funding over rule of law concerns and corruption. And they believe that this postponement is designed to basically trying to get Swedes and the Finns to try to help them achieve and get those funds. Now, this week, just this past week, the Fidesz party, the ruling party here in Hungary, indicated that they will back Finland's bid to join the NATO military alliance, but they have not said whether they will do that with Sweden. They said that the vote will be taking place sometime in the future.
OK, Pablo Gutierrez in Budapest, thank you very much indeed. And just to confirm that latest development, that the Parliament in Hungary has voted to approve Finland's application to join the NATO military alliance.
The DPRK has fired 2 more ballistic missiles off its coast, the latest in a number of launches. The recent almost daily launches have coincided with joint military drills between the United States and South Korea. Pyongyang has been angered by the military exercises, saying they're in preparation for an invasion. South Korea and the US say they're defensive, and time to mark the 70th anniversary of their alliance.
Myanmar's military leader has vowed to continue cracking down on opponents to army rule. Speaking at an annual military parade, Min Aung Hlaing also said elections would be held, just weeks after admitting the army doesn't control enough territory to hold a vote. Myanmar has been in turmoil since the military deposed Aung San Suu Kyi's civilian government 2 years ago.
Humza Yousaf has been elected as the new leader of the Scottish National Party. He's expected to be confirmed as Scotland's new First Minister in a vote in the Scottish Parliament on Tuesday. The leadership election was called following the surprise resignation of Nicola Sturgeon.
The southern United States is bracing for more storms after a powerful tornado killed 26 people and reduced homes to rubble.
The governor of Mississippi says significant risks remain in parts of the state. President Joe Biden has ordered federal aid to support recovery efforts and declared a state of emergency. The town of Rolling Fork in Mississippi was hardest hit, where hundreds of people have been left homeless. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Will Denslow, who's there. Will, warnings of more severe weather to come. What preparations are in place for that, given what's already happened?
Yeah, some real warnings coming out over the last couple of days from the National Weather Service, from health officials meteorologists and elected officials here in states like Mississippi. Of course, we heard from Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, bracing that there could be more extreme weather through Sunday and for the days ahead. Of course, it's estimated that over 20 million Americans in the south and southeast of the country could be bracing for extreme weather events, even on Sunday, just a couple of days after that tornado ripped through this town of Rolling Fork. And the devastation you can still see so clearly behind me. We saw on Sunday hailstone, some hail with a width of 2 inches in diameter breaking through car windshields. And the message from Alejandro Mayorkas, the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, who visited Rolling Fork on Sunday, said that extreme weather is simply becoming more common.
We see extreme weather events increasing, only increasing in gravity, in severity, and in frequency. And we have to build our communities to be best prepared for them, to prevent the devastation to the extent possible, to be able to quickly respond and recover, to prove ourselves resilient. We cannot do that alone. We need one another, and that is what we are here to communicate.
And Jamie, when it comes to just how rare this tornado that hit Rolling Fork was, there are around 1,200 or so tornadoes every single year in the United States, but only around 1% are EF4 category tornadoes like this one. Less than 1% are on the ground for over 50 miles. This particular tornado was on the ground for 59 miles. Jamie?
Will, so more bad weather to come. I mean, how will more storms impact the ongoing recovery efforts?
Yeah, there are real concerns that this could put further strains on resources. Of course, we heard from Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, when he was here in Rolling Fork yesterday. He says that there are a couple of things that needed to be focused on going forward for this community. Of course, hundreds of homes have been destroyed. He said that housing was a major focus in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. He also said that more small business assistance was required. The Secretary of Homeland Security on his visit said as well that the federal government will be committed to providing aid for as long as it takes. But of course, with concerns that there is more extreme weather on the way in other parts of the south and the southeast in the coming days, and the fact that tornado season hasn't really begun in earnest yet either, there are real fears that that could, of course, distract attention away from communities like this going forward. Jamie?
Well, just watching these terrible pictures, I mean, it looks like a war zone. I wonder what struck you most about what you've seen.
The power, the magnitude, the severity of the tornado. Just in front of me, there is two 16-wheelers practically toppled on top of each other. The sheer velocity and force needed to create something like that, unfathomable. You can see behind me just decimation, houses just reduced to rubble. One person saw a sign on the floor on the property of her ground. It said "Home Sweet Home." She was telling me that sign was above her bed, and it was now on the floor, and all that's left of that bedroom, the bed is still standing. That looks all right. The only trouble, there are no walls, there's no ceiling above it. Just speaks to the decimation. There are restaurants. You'd have no idea that they were once a restaurant, that they were restaurants a couple of days ago. The only clues to provide any kind of semblance of what they used to be, a few takeaway containers, a few pots and pans. Apart from that, it's just debris and destruction. And that is a scene playing out across every single corner of this town with a population of just around 2,000 people.
Will, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Will Denslow, in the United States.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, walking the walk at Shanghai Fashion Week. Designers hope order books will fill after the pandemic.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's ambassador to the UK, Zheng Zeguang, is making his first official visit to Northern Ireland. Relations between the region and China have traditionally been strong, with companies and universities collaborating, particularly in the field of renewable energy. The ambassador met Belfast's Lord Mayor, Christina Black, ahead of a forum on hydrogen technology.
We discussed future partnerships and working together. We discussed my visit to Shenyang over 15 years ago. I've been advised that I need to make an immediate return, so I look forward to visiting China again. But there's lots of avenues for us to explore in terms of advancing technology, so there's great plans afoot.
Italy is expecting to welcome 3 million visitors from China this year after COVID restrictions were eased.
Yes, the country is seen as one of Europe's top destinations for Chinese tourists who make a significant contribution to Italy's economy. Our correspondent Hermione Kitson reports.
Spring signals the start of Italy's peak tourist season, which this year welcomes the return of travellers from China.
I really like Italy, especially Rome. It's amazing.
It's very famous, Italy, and it has very old buildings in here. So I think this is a big attractive point for me.
Yeah, it's really special.
There's been a steady rise in bookings from China after COVID-19 restrictions were eased. Cristiano Vorotti is the China manager at the Italian National Tourist Board and says this is the moment the industry has been waiting for.
I've been spending the whole pandemic period in China, and it's been pretty tough, not having the opportunity to travel out of the country. So I'm pretty sure that now that the Chinese borders are finally open, everyone is really happy to go back traveling abroad.
Paolo Bellet manages 3 hotels in the capital and says that post-pandemic, Chinese travellers are willing to pay more for a different approach.
Normally in the past, Chinese, they were only traveling by groups. Now we can see the Chinese are booking individuals, and this is very important, very interesting.
In addition to the Eternal City, high on the agenda for Chinese tourists is the commercial hub of Milan and cities of art such as Venice and Florence. Experts say they're high spenders who make a significant contribution to key industries.
And especially they are concentrating in those areas that are really important for Made in Italy. Fashion, food, design. And that's very important for us.
According to the Italian National Institute of Statistics, in 2019, 5.3 million Chinese tourists travelled to Italy. And while it remains the #1 destination in Europe, a return to pre-pandemic levels isn't expected until 2024. But even a predicted 60 to 70% recovery of Chinese tourism this year will provide a boost to Italy's economy.
The connection between Italy and China is historical, so we had always an exchange of business, and therefore the Chinese are always more than welcome.
A partnership set to restart and revive business and cultural ties between the two countries. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Rome.
Shanghai's Fashion Week is hoping to attract a wide audience for the latest designs.
Many are hoping the show will jumpstart orders, particularly from overseas buyers, following the disruption caused by the pandemic. Our correspondent Chen Tong reports.
This is Mode Fair, where brands that have not gone big set up their booths to show fashion buyers their designs. We met with Shen Weilian, who just came back from Milan Fashion Week last month. This season, his inspiration came from China's fireworks. So far, 65% of Shen's sales were in North America. And the next step is the European market.
Our target is to enter the European market this year. Most fashion buyers at the Shanghai Fashion Week follow the fashion trend in Europe. Our style is niche in Europe, so we want to find our feet in Europe first and then back to China.
Shen is not the only designer who wants to tap into the overseas market this year.
What should it be called?
Swedish designer Charlotte Gandolf, who set up her brand in Shanghai in 2018, has gained many fans in China. She was planning to expand overseas last year, but delayed the move due to the COVID-19 outbreak. But all the business expansions are back on the agenda. She plans to open her first brick-and-mortar store in China and go overseas too.
On April 17, I'm shooting my new collection in New York. I'm lining up all of my resources. I'm getting PR, I'm getting showroom. It's happening. Now I want to go global. I can travel, I can do it.
Hundreds of fashion brands are attending this year's Mode Fair. It's the biggest edition of the event after China lifted COVID restrictions. Using innovative marketing strategies, launching new designs, and getting their consumers back is a priority for these brands.
At this season's Shanghai Fashion Week, a dozen trade fairs are in town, giving thousands of designers places to get their buyers back. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
And finally, a duck at the Beijing aquarium is now known as Duck Nanny after it started feeding fish. The shell duck was seen dropping food into the pond it shares with a group of koi. Water off a duck's back, you might think, but apparently not. Staff say it's probably just accidentally dropping its food in the water as it goes to take a drink, and the koi swim over to feast on the leftovers. But as a stand-in fish attendant, it certainly fits the bill.
At least you didn't say it was quackers, Jamie.
No. Who writes this?
Not me.
No.
The headlines again. Germany brought to a standstill as a general strike over pay grounds planes, trains and public transport.
Our other headlines: bank shares take a breather after the collapsed Silicon Valley Bank is rescued by rival lender First Citizens.
And in the face of mass protests, Benjamin Netanyahu delays controversial plans to overhaul Israel's legal system.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again though tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team in London, bye-bye.